Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
The deteriorating condition of our beautiful planet is deplorable. With the escalation of habitat encroachment, deforestation, pollution, and general exploitation, the future is looking grim. It would appear we're an ecologically narcissistic race to the detriment of everything around us. Can this be healed? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the Voice of Canada Broadcast Network, www.vocbn.ca. With us this hour to explore the concept of ecological narcissism and possible solutions is Jeanine M. Canty. Jeanine is a professor of transformative studies at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, telecommunicating from Boulder, Colorado. Formerly the chair of environmental studies at Naropa University, she continues to guest teach at Naropa and at the Pacifica Graduate Institute's ecopsychology certification program. A lover of nature and justice, contemplative practices, her teaching intersects issues of social and ecological justice, ecopsychology, and the process of worldview expansion and change. She's the author of numerous books, her latest, Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. You can find Jeanine at www.ciis.edu/profile/Jeanine-Canty. Jeanine, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Oh, thank you for hosting me. It's a pleasure.
You're all the way in Arizona now. You kind of bounce back and forth between Arizona and Colorado, yes?
I do. It's not a bad life. I spend time in the winter and spring a bit with my mother in Arizona.
Nice. Oh, family's so important, particularly right now.
Yeah.
So you're a professor of transformative studies. What are transformative studies?
Yeah, transformative studies, they can fit in lots of different kind of pairings. And I particularly focus on transformative learning and change and really working with adults' worldviews and how to make them more resilient to expand to meet the challenges of the present. And I've done a lot of that in terms of specifically working around both ecological and social issues, kind of the crises of our times.
That's definitely a crisis, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you find that people are kind of backsliding in a certain way, given the political environment and everything else? It seems like people are kind of pulling back and going to their opposite corners and shoring up their defenses and not really very expansive at this time.
Yes, that's definitely a important observation that people really need to pay attention to. There's been such a kind of a backlash against both ecological and social issues, and in many ways, it's a failure of these movements to meet people where they're at. Transformative learning theory really holds that you can only work with people's transformation by just going just over their boundary levels, their kind of comfort within their worldviews. And a lot of the momentum, some of our climate change and social issues movements have made create, in some ways, othering where everyone doesn't see a role that they'll have in a new vision of the future. And so people get really protective and fearful of what that might mean for them. So it's really important to have change that includes everyone, where people really belong and see a place for themselves.
Do people actually go into fear that they might lose something that, one of their sacred cows if they become more ecologically conscious?
Yeah, yeah. And I always preface that I'm pretty US centric since I live in the US and raised here. And so I look at that in terms of often there's this paradigm of what the, American dream is and what the success is, and people pull themselves up from their bootstraps, and a lot of the goals of the American dream is to have unbridled success, where we have the country always has a bigger GDP, and people can really obtain all of these economic resources and kind of a quote unquote beautiful life. And when that people come into contact with different stories of, oh, it's the American dream that's actually harming so much of the ecology and also the lifestyles of people not only within the US but around the world, with our levels of consumerism and a lot of our kind of leveraging. It's fearful to folks because they've had generations of subscribing to this paradigm, to this story. And so there hasn't really been much preparation for what would a different story be, and how would my happiness and well-being actually fit into this. And so yeah, it's really scary, and we end up people end up employing all of our defense mechanisms, and yeah, definitely it's a thing.
And it seems like we've about ridden this horse as far as we can, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And I think what we're witnessing right now is kind of a clamp down to try to almost, milk every ounce of, yeah, kind of corporate global capitalism to, um, um, yeah, increase wealth, keep with the same story. But what we're witnessing is something that many, including David Corton and Joanna Macy, call the great unraveling, where we're seeing worldwide systems just start to unbuckle, fail. And most people, even if they subscribe to this worldview, can recognize that. The economic systems, political systems, our social systems, our healthcare, everything's not working. And most people have low to high levels of, or some levels of discontent with our systems.
And yet at the same time, that trying, the beating the dead horse to the very end has
Mm.
people very polarized, doesn't it?
It sure does. Yeah, it sure does. And I think that goes back to both fear, but also a story that's told to different, I would use the term positionalities, whether it's our class or our politics or our race, even gender, of who's with us and who's not with us. And so it's a long-standing strategy to keep people separate from one another, so we vote and act against our common interests, because most of us aren't flooding with abundance of money, or profiting from some of these large scale systems. Yet if we're told that we can, or this is a possibility for us, and other people are taking away our freedoms, we can easily subscribe to that, because we haven't really been um, shown and experienced different ways of being.
Yeah, different options are a good thing at this point. So
Yeah.
what's eco psychology?
Yeah, and some people say eco psychology. Often I use eco psychology, and so it's really bringing together the eco, which is in Latin, it's oikos, which is home, with psychology, which is of course psyche. And eco psychology was created with a need to address how people of Western civilization specifically, and I extend that to anyone that's living under the paradigm of corporate globalization, how we really cut ourselves off from our relationships with nature, remembering that we're animals living with Earth systems, dependent on all of Earth's the life of the planet, and we've created a power over disconnection in our psyches and in our just day to day. And by doing so, we've not only hurt the planet, creating human caused climate change, we've also spiraled into pathology within the human systems, that we see excess suffering with people because we're so disconnected from Earth. And ecopsychology, it was really created for two needs. The environmental movement realized that it wasn't doing so great in terms of a lot of its tactics revolved around shaming and blaming. And most people don't enjoy shaming and blaming, myself included, and realized that it could benefit from using some developmental theories and practices within the field of psychology. And then the second was that actually the mainstream field of psychology, which really arose as part of the Western paradigm, could use some ecology in terms of looking at larger collective issues. Most psychology is about a privatized relationship. You or me, one person with their therapist, and you keep everything kind of in that closed issue, and it's all about, what's your relationship with your father, your mother, your partner, your children, but never really looking at, well, if the planet's suffering, the planet's dying in many spaces, wouldn't that affect my psyche and my well-being? Don't those parallel? And there's four major assumptions of eco-psychology that I work from. And the first is that the Earth is calling for healing. We see so many, I don't even have to paint them out here, but we see so many devastating statistics, major catastrophes, pollution, plastic, we can go on and on, but just really recognizing that the Earth is suffering, and so much of that is caused by our current human systems. And then the second one is that people are suffering, and really looking at what John Powell would call surplus suffering. I have a lot of kind of Buddhist underpinnings, so and that philosophy or view, life has a lot of suffering in it anyway, but that we have systems that are causing more suffering than is needed. And so we see so many folks with high levels of anxiety and depression. There's so many diagnosed pathologies. We see so many forms of addiction, whether it's addiction to, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We're just going to have to take a station break.
Oh, yeah.
Jeanine and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Ecopsychology. Is that something like sending trees to therapy? This with us this hour discussing the many facets of ecopsychology is Jeanine M. Canty, the author of Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism, and Healing Our Planet. Jeanine, we were just talking about ecopsychology, and it's a whole new way of looking at things versus being a one-on-one on the couch with your therapist. Is it working with your relationship with nature, say, for instance?
It is. And really looking at how we're connected and we're of the same system. And so there's lots of concepts and practices within eco psychology. I was talking about those four assumptions, and the third one is really looking at how the welfare of people and the welfare of planet are totally interconnected, and the suffering of both aren't separate phenomenon. They're one and the same. And so attuning back to our relationships with nature can spark so many forms of reconnection and healing.
Haven't we disconnected from nature to our extreme detriment? I mean, there's so many studies out there now that are starting to recognize that when we separated ourselves from the planet, we don't walk barefoot on the ground anymore. We're not grounded. I mean, our physical health is suffering as a result. Have you looked into that and what's your take on all of that?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yes, that's fully spot on. And there's so much research out there, and there's a number of fields related with ecopsychology, including climate psychology and ecotherapy, and a number of others as well that will bring that to front and center. Eco psychology also goes kind of way back to how did we disconnect from nature and what are the origins from that and what are the results of doing that. And so going way back to just looking at how all of us have ancestors that were earth-based peoples and when did we separate our identities from nature, and even looking at indigenous Europeans and being ripped from the land through different movements such as the rise of church and state, really turning more earth-based kind of farm communities into workers for the larger systems and moving to the cities. And there's a whole kind of progression of breaking our earth-based traditions, our hunter-gatherer ways, and really moving into what some would call domestication, where we're staying in one place and looking at how that results in women giving higher rates of birth and then needing more resources and spreading out across the planet to support different empires. And also just looking at the way we went from having more direct hands-on experience, whether it was through gathering food, growing food, making things from our hands, to then living in a more mechanistic society where most of us don't really have skills to survive with, and looking at how abstraction has become so much of our main life, where in some ways it's such a gift that we have such abstract thinking minds. So we can do things like write books and create in technology, but also looking at how that's resulted in a disconnection from our bodies, disconnection from firsthand experiences, how the invention of the written word and
Well,
abstract thinking. Yeah.
we've gotten away from so much of the interface between nature and humans.
Yes.
And then we've always got a better idea, right? So it's not good enough to just get a carrot that's grown out of the ground. We have
Mhm.
to dehydrate it and process it and, put it in these little packages and so you can heat it in your microwave. And pretty
Mhm.
soon our nutrition, our groundedness, all of that has gone by the wayside. What do you see the result of that?
Oh, yeah. We have so many people that are just really sick. We spend so much money on health care and all of these medications and interventions, but most of us, there's so many places across the globe, within our countries and within our communities, where people don't have healthy food. And so many people don't even have the resources to afford healthy food if it's in their community, and there's so many communities that it's just not there. The grocery stores, the convenience stores don't carry this, and so that relates to the way that our bodies work, the way our brains function, just even meeting our basic needs. And so
So
we have,
so basically we're starving amongst plenty, aren't we?
Mhm.
There's all you walk into a grocery store, it's full of stuff,
Yeah.
but how much of it is actually food is it to question. So what's ecological justice?
Yeah, ecological justice is really looking at how women, uh, children, indigenous peoples, people of color, as well as poor and working class peoples have less access to environmental well-being, and they're marginalized by their class and their race and their genders and age. And I would also put in there people with varying abilities as well as LGBTQ communities. And these are communities that have less political and economic power to fight different corporations that might bring toxicity to their communities. Yeah.
That's scary too. It's like we have to live here, and yet if a corporation wants to move in and frack, okay, and destroy the groundwater, there's nothing that stops it. And so
Yeah.
we're subject to that. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah, and there's communities such as where I live in Boulder is a fairly affluent community. So the community, if a harming industry comes in, people can rally and take time off and protest and have the power to move it somewhere else. But then it goes to someone else's community, and
It
that's
doesn't have
a
the power, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so yeah, just the idea that there's no throwaway, even if there's justice throughout one community or one nation, then it just gets exported to another nation that has less political and economic power.
So what's the emotional bond between humans and the earth? And I'm sure
Oh
that's
yeah.
stressed right now.
Yeah, well, we're innately kin. There's a term, biophilia, which is that there's just love between humans and nature, because Earth is our home. This is the place that we arise from. Uh, in ecopsychology, one of my favorite authors, psychologist, Charles Glendenning, talks about this concept called the primal matrix that builds on the work of Christina and Stanislav Grof, but really saying that our innate, intact state of being has three dimensions. And the first is this belonging, feeling at home in the world, and really knowing that when we're within Earth, even though it's not a completely safe experience, nothing ever is really safe, we feel a oneness with land and water. We're dependent on clean air. Most of us love animals, and we were talking about hummingbirds. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, um, people have become afraid of nature.
Mhm.
I remember one time my former sister-in-law, I was going to go out and take my children backpacking, just me and the kids, right? And she says, "You're not going to do that without a man. In fact, why are you doing that anyway?" Right?
Right.
And it's to me that I'm at home there, but I started watching that after I noticed it displayed in her, and I realized most people, particularly women who are supposed to be the most connected to the planet, are terrified of nature.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually the converse of biophilia, biophobia. And that
Mm.
actually relates a lot to this disconnection, and also what we were just talking about with environmental justice. There's so much media, both real and I would say in some ways fictitious, when you're looking at all the stories that make people really afraid of nature, not only from the kind of elements and the animals and the wildness, but also in some ways, those primetime series where there's a killer behind every bush, and it's so scary. And then also just the idea that getting dirty is something bad, and that we're supposed to be these well kept, groomed, pristine, especially as women, folk, and that we need to be taken care of. And being with Earth, it requires strength and endurance and getting dirty. And yeah, so there's a lot of that myth, but there's so many wild women getting out there with nature.
I think it's kind of in our blood, isn't it? The feminine and the earth are very much related.
Yes, yes, and I love the field of ecofeminism that really looks at the long history that women have with Earth, and so many of the great myths of our of humanity. Earth is feminine, and today we hear of Gaia theory from James Lovelock and Lynn Margolis looking at Earth as a living system, but really Gaia as a goddess. And so many people say Mother Earth, and Earth gives birth to everyone, every being, and we're fully dependent. I like the image of imagining that we all have umbilical cords tethering us to Earth because we're those types of beings.
Well, it's amazing how many of the indigenous people were more matriarchal and had a really deep, sacred relationship with the earth and what they considered the earth goddess. And when did that turn around? When did we lose that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important that to recognize that not everyone has lost that because there's over 350 million indigenous people, many inhabiting matriarchal systems and living within the lands that they originated in, with the most folks that have lost our earth-based connections. It has been a cycle of really ownership of land and breaking ties, what we were talking about with church and state. Also, there was in Europe and across the globe the witch burnings, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
really, yeah,
Well, on that cheery
yeah.
note, we're going to have another station break.
Okay.
Janine and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Has everyone got their heads stuck in the sand? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the climate crisis is Jeanine M. Canty. You can find Jeanine at www.ciis.edu/profile/Jeanine-Canty. Jeanine, it's kind of hard to miss that the earth is struggling, the people are struggling in our current system, and yet seems like denial is the norm. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's so painful to witness how many people, and really more over culture and corporations, will spew this language of denial. I think again it goes back to fear of having to change, and also fear that there's a hidden agenda from others that aren't like oneself that's pushing these agendas. And so, yeah, a lot of distrust between people from different political and identity spectrums. And there's also just a fear of what would it look like if we started to attune to climate crisis and actually had to change. Uh, I think, again, being US centric, we like people in the US, we like our stuff and our things and consumerism, and being told that our consumerism is at the heart of the ecological disasters that we're seeing is really painful. Or looking at our the way that we drive automobiles and get our goods, and so many folks' livelihoods are dependent on these systems that are harming. So it's really scary to think about it. And when we receive messages from our government and corporations that we don't have to worry about this, that it's not a thing, and to just calm down, and scientists are coming up with other solutions so you don't have to change. We want to believe that because that's easier than to think about having to change our entire lives.
And that therein lies the problem, isn't it? That these systems are so overlording that, particularly at this late date in the state of the planet, it's going to take some radical change, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna take such, big amounts of change, yet at the heart of it, which is, in some ways elegant and lovely, some of it is about being simple. And most of us have ancestral roots where we can pull back to of what simplicity looks like. And so many of us, I can speak from my own, experience, are so burnt out of all of the things we need to do in terms of keeping up with consumerism, with work, with social media, with all of these expectations. And so having ways to be more simple, yet also meet our needs for livelihood and wellness are actually possible might be interested in, oh, what would that look like?
Well, I've been told by one of my
Right.
teachers, shamanic teachers,
Yeah.
that everything that we own actually owns a piece of us. Okay.
Mm,
And that the more things that we own, the less of us is present here and more of it's out there. And there's a
wow.
certain amount of wisdom to that, isn't there?
Oh, I would say 100%. We get so scattered, and I love that being owned by all of these things that really take our attention and block us from actually experiencing the what's really the good parts of life. Uh, so many of us are doing professions, jobs that aren't actually our callings. A lot of traditions talk about that we're born into this world with a gift to give to earth. And those are things that actually require our community to help us accrue. Yet most of us are conditioned to think that we need to be, doctors or bankers or lawyers. And those are all great professions, or but things that might not be our true callings, and often our true callings don't come up with a big paycheck, but they could bring lots of happiness if we have systems or contentment that support that. Uh, yeah, yeah, and so we're so scattered because we're constantly trying to keep up with all of these various needs that are put out there for us, but aren't things that we were born to do.
At this point, what percentage of what's put out there for us is just to try to sell us something?
Oh gosh, I don't even think I wanna know. I mean, I don't know statistically, but it's I mean, even, I feel like those of us who are most focused on not being so driven into marketing and consumerism, we know that we actually can't. It's really hard to meet our livelihoods without being having at least one foot into those worlds, and it feels like everything has some sort of kind of marketed agenda that's driving this larger machine. Yet often it's our interactions with one another that are authentic, our interactions with nature, our staying with our body, our forms of creativity, our dreams, our habits of being in family, of eating, our ceremonies that do have lots of pure forms.
So let's talk a little bit about narcissism.
Oh,
It's
yes.
kind of a popular catch term right now, but
Oh,
but when we're talking about collective narcissism, what are we talking about here?
yeah. And this collective narcissism is really looking at how in Western societies, and I always extend that to anyone living under a global corporate paradigm, we're really bred to be consumed about ourselves, about our own well-being, that we've been bred to be so individualistic that we are falling into these narcissistic paradigms where we have little time to think about other people because we're always trying to be the most successful, the best looking, having the highest income, the most amount of toys, the best bodies, the biggest social media followings, like all of these very superficial pursuits, and we have little bandwidth for being compassionate to others, and then very little bandwidth to being concerned of what's happening globally, especially to the earth. And yeah, I noticed that with the kind of rise of this use of the term narcissists, and everyone's calling everyone else a narcissist, or that's an extreme, but that there is a lot of truth in terms of there's not necessarily more people classified with extreme narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, but as a larger culture, we're really so conditioned to be narcissistic, because when we do so, we actually consume more because we have a fear of not being enough. So I looked at the patterns of individual narcissism and really noticed how this is operating on a collective scale with societies.
Well, whether it's individual or the societal,
Yeah.
the one thing that um, seems to characterize narcissism is this unfulfillable hunger, like hungry ghosts. Like there's never enough. You're never good enough. You're never pretty enough. There's never enough, and yet people are chasing that ghost, if you will, to the detriment of the planet. How can we miss that, and how can we start to see it?
Yeah, and that's actually maybe the saddest part of narcissism, is that it comes about from a wound. And most people demonize folks that are labeled as being highly narcissistic, but we don't necessarily ask, like, well, what happened to you? And when the kind of the psychology behind it pinpoints that they had faulty attachments, that they had um, damaged relationships with their primary caregivers to such an extent that they had to create a fictitious kind of cocoon, a fictitious world that's protective of themselves. And so while a narcissist comes off as so selfish and ego driven, thinking they're so boastful and arrogant, deep inside they're incredibly damaged and insecure, and so they're constantly just trying to fulfill these needs. And then when we relate that to the larger culture, when we look at our broken relationship to our primary caregiver, Mother Earth, we're constantly looking to fill needs through all sorts of addictions and other faulty uh, um, pursuits.
And yet it's not working. It hasn't worked. It never does work. What's it going to take to shake us out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's, um, I think a lot of it is really coming to acceptance in terms of recognize that the systems that we're functioning within aren't working for pretty much everyone. And that's actually one of the things I love about eco-psychology, is that underneath that, it's saying that everyone under a global corporate paradigm is traumatized. And so for me, that's really sparks compassion. I'm less angry at a person in control or at the top, because I wouldn't treat anyone who is traumatized or as an enemy. And so coming to some sort of acceptance of these things. And what I mentioned before when we were talking about the unraveling of systems, learning some information, getting more aware of what's going on across the globe with all of these issues is a good start of understanding. And, there's the um, heady part of it, which again is abstract thinking, but a big piece is actually feeling it. So many of us are kind of cut off from our emotions. And in Western society, we're supposed to be kind of strong, or not talk about our emotions so much. And again, just do that with your therapist, or your
Does,
closest friend.
doesn't that leave us with a backlog of unprocessed emotion that's part of the problem?
It sure does. And again, so many people are afraid of experiencing their emotions, but that's actually a key of actually feeling the levels of anger, sadness, grief, even the apathy that we have in our current situations, and letting that permeate us and come to acceptance with that. Because once we actually do that, new capacities emerge and new feelings. And also, we tap into all of these unmet desires that are more deeper within us for authentic community and
Well,
selves.
it's time for us to take yet another station break. Please stay with us as Janine and I continue to explore the future of our planet. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. How many aspects of the self are there?
Oh,
This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Jeanine M. Canty. You can find Janine at www.ciis.edu/profiles/Janine-Canty. Janine, let's discuss aspects of the self. What is the ecological self?
yeah, I love the ecological self, and this is a concept that was developed by the one of the founders of the deep ecology movement, Arne Næss, a Norwegian philosopher and deep powder skier. And it's really when we start to extend our boundaries, where we kind of break open from being just these individual egos or individual bodies, and start to connect with beings in nature. So maybe at first it's just a bunny that's in the backyard that we see each morning, and oh, there's that bunny, or you're sitting outside and there's a bird and who's tweeting, and you decide to tweet back, and suddenly you're in a conversation, or there's a particular tree that you sit under or walk by each day. Suddenly we might realize that we're kind of having a little bit of a love affair with this other being, that we care so much for them that we realize that our wellness is bound up with their wellness, and our boundaries extend. And we start doing this with lots of beings in the bioregions that we live in, to extend that we've changed.
So what is the multicultural self?
Oh, yeah, the multicultural self, it's similar in terms of moving into the human world. When we start talking to folks that are different than us, outside of our own, maybe gender or race or political boundaries or religions, nations, all sorts of the class, and we learn their stories, they stop being like the other, and we actually get curious about their histories, their lineages, their suffering. And we realize that, again, we maybe we become friends, and perhaps there's some love that blooms between us, that we realize that our well-being is bound up with them. And once again, we change.
But you said something pretty interesting, and that was curiosity.
Mhm.
Is curiosity the cure for the judgmentalism that we've been brought up with? That if somebody's different, we must judge against it to make ourselves okay.
Yeah, I would say curiosity is really important. I also like using the term and practice of generosity lately, of when I come into contact with someone and there's some sort of interaction that I can hold in my lens, that I want the best interaction between the two of us that's possible, knowing that one person doesn't have to win or one person doesn't lose. So, how can I hold space large enough for both of us to inhabit? And so, yeah, being curious about what's going on for others is, I think, so key to all of that.
Again, as you were speaking, what comes to mind for me is neutrality. That
Mm,
everything is so polarized, it's us or them, that
yeah,
at least one of the parties, is there an adult present, right? At least
right.
one of the parties needs to come into a little more neutral stance before they can even see the other person. What
Yeah.
is your recommendation to start moving towards that neutrality?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much there. And in eco-psychology, there is actually a term called arrested development, which is basically saying most adults in our society, we never had those proper rites of passage with Earth to be mature adults. So most of us are functioning as at the maturity level of teenagers or even lower than that. So becoming mature, being more self-aware of our own biases and the way we're holding the way we think and playing that out in the world, and also giving space for other views and other practices, other realities. So many of us, or most of us, inhabit a fixed worldview that we, of course, think is correct, or else we wouldn't be in it. But so much of it comes from our upbringings. We were born into
And
specific.
we never re-examine it.
Exactly. And we don't do what's called, what Putnam would call bridging, that we don't have enough experiences with people that have different worldviews to have the ability to expand our own or play around with our own.
Well, back to the selves. What is the transpersonal self?
Yeah, the transpersonal self is really looking beyond just the nature and human, but I would say it taps more into the spiritual self. Or, and we can have so many different words for, some people who might, our religion might say it's more of like God or the divine, the sacred. There's those, the Matrix if you're into sci-fi, but just recognizing that there's a larger force that binds us all, that's bigger and more intelligent than all of us, and but is also supportive of our well-being. And when we can really expand our boundaries to kind of the widest levels, level of grace pours in, where we don't have to be in control of everything and figure out and come up with every solution, but we can actually drop more into our bodies and the larger forces of nature, and the larger forces of whatever you may call it, that can be real help.
So it would appear that the selves have been compromised in much of the populace. What's caused this and what are the ramifications?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think so many of us have been conditioned to have such shallow pursuits in terms of having to have um, a real need to have a job. Again, in a we have to pick this, or this. Have identities and callings that are not our truest, authentic desires. So many of us haven't had the privilege and space to actually examine who we really are and where our heart falls, and what we really want to do with our lives, and what type of communities and people we want to be a part of. We have so many stressors outside of us that we have to meet that just like a unnourished seed or plant, we're unnourished people because we don't have the sustenance to explore all of these various selves.
And that's so sad. It's just I mean, it seems like the whole system's designed around keeping us from being introspective.
Yeah.
Our time and everything is filled with so much superfluous stuff. There's no time to look within. So, so
Yeah.
how? Here's the $64 question of the hour. How do we go about healing collective narcissism?
Yeah, yeah. Um, that is really, again, what I was speaking about before the break in terms of becoming aware of the issue, becoming aware of these unraveling systems, feeling the deep emotions that's involved with it, and also starting to reaccrue our inherent gifts, our birthrights that many of us haven't tapped into. For me, a big part, obviously, is that ecological self and starting to spend time in nature, in community, being curious. Uh, Another piece for me is also mindfulness. So many of us are caught up in our thinking, abstract minds that we've disconnected our thoughts to our bodies, and we're always in these kind of radical negative thought loops of in the Western psyche that something's wrong, someone's trying to get mine. There's so many adversaries out there. So being able to notice that and how much it operates in like almost every moment of each day and starting to quiet that and start attending to just like the nowness of being here. We have like so many opportunities in every day and every moment to actually have profound experiences that are really ordinary of taking a break and sipping on a nice cup of tea, to having a beautiful conversation with someone, to laughing, to smelling a flower, to walking in the rain, hopefully the warm rain, to catching the sunrise or sunset, to having a powerful dream, to making a meal, to growing food. There's just we could spend the rest of our lives just naming the beauty of the world, yet so many of us forget to even every day have gratitude for these. And then in almost every moment, when we stop living in abstraction, and of course that's a privilege because so many of us, so many people are struggling financially. There's so much suffering, yet so many of those things are actually free, even if there's access.
Well,
Uh,
it's about time.
oh
We're
wow!
going to be out of time, but before we
Wow.
close, I really need to ask you, Janine, what is your mission?
Oh yeah. In the widest lens, it's to bring greater well-being to all sentient beings, particularly through working with the paradigms of folks within Western uh, civilization to connect with nature and their transpersonal selves.
That's a very valuable mission, particularly at this time.
Mhm.
And may I wish you all the luck in the world on it.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm. But unfortunately, we are out of time. We will thank Janine so much for coming on the show. Our guest this hour has been Jeanine M. Canty, the author of Returning the Self to the Self to Nature, undoing our collective narcissism and healing our planet. To find out more about Janine, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit www.ciis.edu/profiles/Janine Canty. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, visit our website, www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join me right here again on the Voice of Canada Broadcast Network, vocbn.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.